Yeah, there are a few points that we would like to unpack based on your sharing, Marcel. Right? Please join me. Just a note of the wonderful work that the Global Green Growth Institute is doing in the Philippines under your leadership, Marcel. As a Filipino, we are indebted to you. Just for everyone here to appreciate the context that Marcel has been himself to the farthest islands down south, to Sulu, to Tawi-Tawi, exciting sustainable development there, engaging with the communities there. And one of his staff, Rebi, cannot be here because she is on field in Sorsogon. So there's a lot of hope, there's a lot of optimism for us moving sustainable development forward. Now, Marcel, let's go to the PSF as just one of the funding mechanisms available to the Philippine government. And of course, Dr. Renato, the CD of the Department of Finance, is still here with us, engaging with us. How can the government access these funding that is crucially needed in the Philippines, either for resilience building or climate adaptation projects, especially as it impacts those at the very front lines of the climate disasters?
Yes, thank you very much, Bing, for that question. I think, as I mentioned before, the PSF, it's a very small fund, but I do think it's a very good step in the right direction, so we do need to congratulate the Philippine government and the Department of Finance that actually got this established. I think in the beginning it had some growing pains and difficulties in spending. Now they're able to spend $30 million. The question now is, how can we add finance streams to this? The 30 million is coming from the budget of the Philippine government itself. But can we link this to, for instance, the carbon funding? If we can get carbon trade started under Article 6, can that fund be put under the PSF? But then also with mechanisms that will enable local government and other local stakeholders to get increased access to that. At the moment we know there's very limited capacity locally to actually write the proposals for this, to develop the bankable projects for it. So I think there needs to be, when I talk about catalytic funding, if you, let's say you get $100 million from the Green Climate Fund, don't use it for project implementation, use it as a catalytic fund to leverage private sector investment, to leverage inputs from local communities and indigenous people.
Thank you. So don't directly use the GCF into project funding, but use it as a catalytic fund. And can I just have a show of hands if there's any advisory firm here who could help perhaps engage with our government and private sector on preparing these proposals? Because that seems to be a very ripe economic opportunity for advisory firms here. Won't you agree? Because we have, as Marcel said, potentially the lack of the lack of capacity to prepare these robust proposals that meet ESG criteria, right? So that is potentially one pivot for those of us here who could be looking for opportunities in the Philippines, is to make sure that our proposals pass so that we can access and unlock this funding and capitalization. Now, I'd like your comment or your deep dive on the incremental carbon tax. I'm asking because I have friends, for example, there are energy players such as Mr. Francis Galspuno at FPH. We also have Bess Iraula here from Cebu Pacific in the aviation sector, and perhaps other energy players here that could be the critical sectors directly impacted by the decarbonization bill. How will an incremental carbon tax play out in the Philippines?
Let me first start with the Low Carbon Economy Act. I do think it's, again, a very good step, a very important step in the right direction. However, it has an approach of having carbon ceilings, a capped trade approach, where for every sector. And I think for the energy sector, this approach can be very useful. There's a lot of large companies in the energy sector. If we look at the landscape sector, we've got mainly micro, small, medium-sized enterprises that will not be able to engage in that Low Carbon Act. So you need to have another mechanism to drive change, also in those sectors and in those smaller companies. And that's where carbon tax can come in, because if we identify for them how carbon taxes are going to increase in the coming decades. They are also a small and medium-sized enterprise. They will be able to take this into account in their business planning, in the ways in which they are going to develop their products, look at their energy budget. At the moment, there's absolutely no driver for them to do anything on that point.
All right, so I do hope that this creates an incentive, I guess, scheme for businesses to decarbonize and actually really turn it into an economic incentive for them. Now, Marcel, there's also, as Raymond also shared, that even if NEO wanted to outsource their energy requirements for the data center from an RE supplier, there's unfortunately not enough RE. So can I just have a hand raised from the team as well, from the participants as well, who are energy RE players among us? Because we need to clone you guys, or multiply your tribe. Anyone? Oh dear, we gotta engage the right group as well. I mean, you are the best group, but also include RE players in the conversation. So what's stopping us from having more of our RE suppliers in the country?
Well, we had some very nice examples of industry that are making investments in transition fuels, but also looking at renewable energy such as geothermal. But we also know that the exploration of geothermal energy is very risky. So what can the government do to de-risk that particular step? So I think this is where public funding, and particularly climate funding, can come in to help with those initial steps of finding the geothermal sources. There's a lot of technology development also on that front, where in the past certain sources were just not accessible. Now they become accessible with new drilling technologies. So I think for a government of the Philippines, this should be a priority area to invest in, because then you have a baseload energy on which other renewable energies such as offshore wind can bank. And at the moment, it's just going to be very difficult to bring in all those other intermittent sources of energy.
Thank you so much. Marla, are we willing to, is VDO willing to increase its investments in geothermal despite the risks? Yes. Thank you. And Dr. Resida, of course, is intently listening on potentially the government's direction. I'm very sure that that is also among the studies that the Department of Finance is looking at.
One of the things you can consider in terms of payment, because Philippine government can say, well, Mr. Silvius, you can say this, but we just don't have the money in our budget. The banks will say we don't have the capacity and it is too risky. What you could do is think about innovative finance, where now carbon market is becoming disclosed. We're getting access to carbon market through the Low Economy Carbon Act. Let's make carbon deals. Bilateral deals internationally. There's a lot of buyers there. Singapore is a big buyer, has expressed significant interest in buying. You could say, well, if we find more geothermal energy, we're going to exploit that. Every watt of geothermal energy will decrease our carbon footprint by so much. That amount can already be traded in advance on the international market, which can generate carbon finance, which can be put into that first high-risk segment of geothermal energy development. But again, this requires public sector and private sector, private investors, to collaborate on such public-private international carbon deals. I think this is a very interesting prospect. We can also think about items such as debt for climate swaps. Maybe you've heard Mike swap. Maybe you've heard of debt for nature swaps. We can have debt for climate swaps, where internationally there are many countries now are looking for buying large quantities of carbon. You can get pre-finance on that interest to actually be able to cover the investments for renewable energy development, the renewable energy developments in the Philippines. So again, make use of these kind of innovative finance ideas.
All right, with my eye on the time and for us to have lunch, 1 or 2 questions from the group for Mr. Marcel Silvius. If none, please join me in thanking our esteemed panel speaker, Mr. Marcel J. Silvius at the Global Green Growth Institute. And with that, we shall be adjourning to the next part of our session. I'll give the floor back to Sasa. Thank you, Marcel.
It was a pleasure, Ping. Thank you very much for the invitation, being here.